My stepbrother fired me for being old school. Then he came crawling back. Look, I need to tell you something about horses that most people never learn. They do not lie. Cannot lie, actually. A horse will tell you everything you need to know if you just shut up and pay attention. Wish I could say the same about people in $2,000 suits. My name is Jack Thornton, and I spent 32 years working with thoroughbreds at Thornton Equine. My father built that company from dirt and determination back when Kentucky still meant something besides bourbon tourism. He understood that breeding champions was not about fancy technology or marketing presentations. It was about knowing animals, reading them, respecting what they were trying to tell you. The morning everything changed started like any other morning. I was in the main stable at 5 a.m., which is when real work happens on a horse farm. The sun had not cleared the hills yet, and there was that particular silence you only get before the rest of the world wakes up and starts making noise about nothing. Titan was in his stall, and he was not happy. Now, Titan was what we call a proven producer. 7 years old, about 16 hands high, with bloodlines going back to Northern Dancer and Secretariat. On paper, he was worth somewhere north of $5 million. But here is what the spreadsheets do not tell you. Titan was nervous, pacing, favoring his right foreleg just slightly. Most people would not even notice it, but I had been watching horses since I could walk. I opened the stall door slow. No sudden movements. Titan turned his head toward me, ears back. That is horse language for I am not in the mood. I respected that. Started talking to him low and steady, not really saying anything that mattered, just letting him hear my voice and remembered that I was not a threat. My hands smelled like saddle soap and liniment. I moved them along his neck, feeling for tension. Found it right at the withers, that high point where the neck meets the back. There's a pressure point there that most people do not know about. I worked it gentle with my thumb, and after maybe 30 seconds, Titan let out this big exhale and his ears came forward. That is when I checked his hooves. The crack was tiny, maybe a quarter inch, running vertical from a coronet band down. You would miss it completely if you were not looking for it specifically. But I had seen this before. It was a stress fracture, the kind that happens when you push an animal too hard for too long. Our fancy veterinarians with their tablets and ultrasound machines had completely missed it during the last checkup. They had cleared him for breeding season without even getting their hands dirty. I knew what Titan needed. Rest. 6 weeks minimum. Maybe 8. Some time in a soft pasture where he could just be a horse instead of production unit. But that was not what the company needed, and that was becoming a real problem. See, my father died 2 years back. Left the company to me in his will. Should have been simple, but he had remarried late in life to a woman named Veronica, who had a son from a previous marriage. That son was Braden Cole, and Braden had ideas. Big ideas. Disruptive ideas. The kind of ideas that come from getting an MBA and never actually touching a horse. The board meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. I showed up in my work clothes. Still had dirt under my fingernails. Probably should have changed, but honestly, I did not care anymore. The conference room was all glass and chrome, the kind of place that felt designed to make you forget we were in the business of living, breathing animals. Braden was already at the head of the table. He had that look, young, confident hair product that probably cost more than my truck payment. Behind him was a massive screen showing what he called the Global Genetics Initiative. There were graphs going up and to the right, which is apparently the only direction that matters to people like him. Veronica sat to his right, my stepmother, though I never called her that. She had her poker face on. The rest of the board was mostly financial types who had invested after Dad died. They understood profit margins. They did not understand horses. Braden started his pitch without even acknowledging I had walked in. The animal, he explained, was the past, an unreliable data carrier. He called it too much variance, too much biology. What Global Genetics proposed was simple. We would harvest genetic material from our top stallions, store it, clone it, digitize the entire breeding process. Customers could order future champions by subscription, like they were buying software licenses. He showed projections. $50 million in year 1, $200 million by year 3. International expansion. Partnerships with tech companies in Silicon Valley. We would not just be a horse farm anymore. We would be a genomics platform. Someone asked about regulations. Braden smiled. The regulatory framework was evolving, he said. By the time the old guard caught up, we would already on the market. I sat there listening to him talk about horses like they were inventory in a warehouse, assets to be optimized, inefficiencies to be disrupted. He used the word synergy at least 4 times. Every time he said it, I thought about Titan back in that stall with a cracked hoof that needed rest, not innovation. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Sitting in that boardroom, I understood exactly what he meant. When Braden finished, everyone clapped. Veronica proposed a vote to move forward with global genetics as the company's primary focus. Traditional breeding operations, she suggested, should be phased down over 18 months. That meant my entire department. The stallion managers, the veterinary staff, the trainers, 37 people who actually knew what they were doing. The vote passed. 7-1. I was the one. That was when Braden looked at me directly for the first time all morning. He had this expression, like he was talking to a child who just did not get it. He said they were restructuring my role, transitioning me into an advisory position, which is corporate speak for, we are firing you, but want to pretend we are not. I could take a severance package, $50,000, sign an NDA, walk away clean. Or, Braden added, I could fight it and end up with nothing but legal bills. The room went quiet. Everyone waited to see what I would do. Here's the thing about growing up on a horse farm. You learn that value is not always obvious. I looked at Braden, then at Veronica, then at the board members who had never spent a single morning in a stable. I thought about my father, who built this company with his own hands, and probably would have thrown Braden through that glass wall if he were still alive. But I was not my father. I was smarter than that. I told them I did not want the money. I wanted property. Specifically, I wanted the old ranch up at Dead Man's Creek, my grandfather's original homestead, and I wanted Titan. The room got real quiet again, but for a different reason this time. Braden looked at Veronica. Veronica looked at their lawyer. The lawyer, a thin guy named Peterson who smelled like expensive cologne, started shuffling through papers. He found what he was looking for and whispered something to Braden. That was when Braden smiled. He leaned back in his chair like he had just won the lottery, asked me if I was sure, if I really meant the Dead Man's Creek property. Because, he explained, I should probably know something about that land. There was a barn up there, original structure from the 1960s. My grandfather had built it himself, which was admirable, but he had used materials that were, shall we say, problematic by modern standards. Asbestos roofing. Tons of it. The environmental agency had sent them a notice 6 months ago. The whole structure needed to be demolished and materials disposed of according to federal hazardous waste protocols. Cost estimate was around $25,000 for the removal itself, plus penalties for noncompliance, which were adding up daily. The EPA was threatening a fine of $5,000 per day starting next month if they did not have a certified disposal plan in place. If I wanted to take that property off their hands, Braden said, I would be assuming all liability. The cleanup costs, the legal exposure, the ticking clock on those federal penalties, everything. Oh, and about Titan. The horse was currently listed as impaired on their books due to the injury I had documented that morning. An impaired asset was essentially worthless for their genetics program. If I wanted to take a lame stallion along with a toxic waste site, well, that would actually save the company a fortune in write-downs. Braden looked around the table like he was the smartest person in Kentucky. Maybe he was, but smart and wise are 2 different things. I said yes, told him to draw up the papers. Peterson looked confused. Veronica looked suspicious, but Braden looked thrilled. He was getting rid of 2 major problems and making me pay for the privilege. In his mind, he had just pulled off the business move of the century. Unloaded a bunch of dead weight onto some stubborn old-timer who could not adapt to the future. They had the contracts ready by end of day. Corporate lawyers work fast when they smell a win. I read through every page. The property transfer was standard, but there was one clause that caught my attention. Braden insisted on it personally, said it was non-negotiable. Section 4B. The trust retained 100% rights to all genetic material, cloning technologies, and bioderivatives associated with Titan. Basically, they wanted to make sure I could not turn around and compete with their fancy genetics program, could not harvest any material from Titan and sell it. They wanted total ownership of anything science-related. I told Braden that sounded like science fiction to me. I was just a simple horse guy, did not understand all that technical stuff, and did not want any part of it. But I said, let's add something to protect me too. A clause about physical custody. Write it down that I get complete physical care and exclusive rights to natural exploitation of the animal. That way, they could not come audit my farm later and tell me I was feeding him wrong or stabling him wrong. Braden literally laughed. He thought I was worried about surprise inspections. Peterson added the language without even questioning it. For them, natural exploitation meant maybe using Titan to give riding lessons to kids, or pulling a plow. Quaint stuff. Nothing that mattered. They had no idea what that phrase meant in the thoroughbred industry. I signed. Braden signed. Veronica signed. Peterson notarized everything. They cut me a check for unused vacation time, handed me the deed to the Dead Man's Creek property, and the ownership papers for Titan. Just like that, I was out. Walked out of that conference room at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was still up. I could hear traffic on the highway in the distance. My truck was parked in the employee lot, which I guess was not my spot anymore. I stood there for a minute, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket, the property keys, the gate keys, everything I needed. I did not feel defeated. That is the weird part. I felt something else. Relief, maybe, or clarity. Like when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you forget it is heavy, and then you finally put it down and remember what it feels like to breathe. There's an old saying my grandfather used to tell me. One man's trash is another man's treasure. He usually said it when he was buying broken equipment at farm auctions, stuff other people had given up on. He would bring it home, take it apart, fix it, and end up with something valuable. I looked back at the Thornton Equine building, glass and steel and ambition. Braden was probably in there right now, celebrating, telling everyone how he had streamlined operations and eliminated resistance to change. Veronica was probably calculating how much money they saved. The board members were probably already thinking about their next quarterly report. None of them understood what just happened. They gave me land. Real land. The kind they are not making anymore. They gave me a horse that they thought was broken. They signed away their rights to something they did not even understand. And they paid me to take it all. I climbed into my truck, threw the papers on the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I drove out through the main gates of Thornton Equine for the last time, I thought about something my old man used to say when we were working the stables together. He would wipe the sweat off his forehead and look at whatever job we had just finished, and he would tell me this. The only thing faster than a thoroughbred is a lie, but the horse always wins at the finish line. Braden had just bet everything on speed. I was betting on the finish line. The road stretched out ahead of me, winding through Kentucky bluegrass country. The sun was starting to sink toward the hills, painting everything gold. My phone was already blowing up with texts from guys in the industry who had heard I was out. Some offered sympathy, some offered jobs. I turned the phone off. I looked at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. That would be enough to get to the hardware store before it closed. I needed masks, the heavy-duty kind with the cartridge filters, work gloves that could handle sharp edges, a couple of crowbars, maybe a new shovel. Because tomorrow morning, I was not just fixing a horse. I was going to war with 50 tons of toxic roofing that everyone else was too scared to touch. And honestly, I could not wait to get started. The hardware store closed at 6. I made it with about 10 minutes to spare. Guy behind the counter knew me from the old days, did not ask questions when I loaded up on respirator cartridges, heavy canvas gloves, and a new pry bar. He just rang me up and told me to be careful. Some things you do not need to explain in farm country. That night, I slept in my truck in the Walmart parking lot. Could have got a motel, but that seemed like a waste of money when I had a perfectly good sleeping bag and a property waiting for me. Besides, I want to be up at first light. Had a lot to do. The meeting with Peterson, the lawyer, was scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning. Braden wanted everything finalized before he flew out to some tech conference in Austin. He was in a hurry. That should have been my first clue that I had leverage. But honestly, at that point, I was just tired and ready to move forward. Peterson's office was downtown, one of those old buildings that tried too hard to look important, with paneling, leather chairs, a secretary who looked at my work boots like they were tracking in something unpleasant. I sat down across from Peterson's desk and waited. Braden showed up 15 minutes late, which I guess was his way of showing he was busy and important. He had his phone out, typing something, barely acknowledged I was in the room. Veronica was not there. She had apparently decided this was beneath her attention now that the big decisions were made. Peterson laid out the papers. 3 copies of everything. Transfer of deed, liability assumption, animal ownership documentation. It was all pretty straightforward until we got to Section 4B. Braden suddenly got interested in the conversation. He leaned forward, tapped the paragraph with his finger, said this part was critical, non-negotiable. The trust, meaning the company, was retaining 100% of all rights to genetic material, cloning technologies, and bioderivatives associated with Titan. Peterson explained it in legal language that basically meant they owned anything scientific you could do with a horse. Any cells, any DNA, any future technology that might let them create copies or extracts or whatever Silicon Valley was dreaming up next. I scratched my head, played it slow, told them it sounded like science fiction to me. I was just planning to take care of a horse, not run a genetics lab. If they wanted to keep all that fancy stuff, that was fine by me. I did not understand it anyway, and honestly did not want to. Braden smiled. He thought he had me pegged as exactly what he wanted me to be. Simple, old-fashioned, out of touch. But then I said something that seemed reasonable to me at the time. I told Peterson to add a clause about physical custody, something that would protect me from the company sending people out to inspect my farm every other week, telling me I was feeding Titan wrong or keeping him in the wrong kind of stall. I had seen that happen to other guys who sold horses but kept them on their property. The new owners would constantly interfere, claiming they were protecting their investment. I wanted it in writing that I had complete physical care and exclusive rights to natural exploitation of the animal. Peterson looked up, asked me what I meant by natural exploitation. I shrugged, said I meant the normal stuff. Maybe I would use him to teach riding lessons to local kids. Maybe pull a cart in a parade. Just regular horse activities. I wanted to make sure the company could not come tell me I was not allowed to use my own horse for normal farm purposes. Braden actually laughed out loud. He looked at Peterson and said to write it in exactly as I requested. He told me I was worrying about nothing. The company did not care if I was giving pony rides or plowing fields. That was not where the value was. The value was in the genetic code, the intellectual property, the scalable technology. Everything I was describing, Braden explained like he was talking to a child, was analog, low value, non-threatening to their business model. If I wanted exclusive rights to parade my horse around at county fairs, they were happy to grant that in writing. Peterson added the language, typed it up right there. Jack Thornton receives complete physical custody and exclusive rights to natural exploitation of said animal. It went in as Section 4C, right after their genetics clause. I read it over, nodded, said that looked good to me. Neither one of them knew what natural cover meant in the thoroughbred industry, and I sure as hell was not going to explain it to them. We signed everything. 3 copies. Peterson notarized each one, gave me my set in a manila folder that smelled like fresh ink and toner. Braden was already standing up, checking his watch. He had a flight to catch. Told me it was nice working with me. Hoped there were no hard feelings. Said something about how disruption is always painful but necessary. I shook his hand. It was soft, the kind of hand that had never held a shovel or felt the grain of wood under sandpaper. I told him good luck with his venture. He left. Peterson walked me out. At the door, he paused and said something that stuck with me. He mentioned that he had grown up on a farm himself, down in Tennessee. His dad raised beef cattle. He said sometimes the old ways have a reason for existing. Then he handed me my copies and went back to his office. I wondered if he knew, but it did not matter. The papers were signed. Dead Man's Creek was about 40 minutes north of town, up a winding road that turned from asphalt to gravel and finally to dirt. The gate was rusted but solid. My grandfather had built it from railroad ties back in the 50s. Behind it, I could see the old barn, sagging under the weight of 50 years and that asbestos roof everyone was so worried about. The property was 12 acres, most of it hillside pasture that had not been maintained in probably a decade. Grass was overgrown. Fences were down in places. But the bones were good. The land itself was solid. Water rights from the creek. Good drainage. Enough flat space for a small stable and a turnout area. I opened the gate. The hinges squealed. Drove my truck up the rutted driveway and parked next to the barn. Titan was arriving the next morning. I had work to do before then. I started with the roof, put on the respirator, the heavy gloves, got the pry bar, and started pulling off the old asbestos shingles. It was slow work, dangerous work, the kind of work that companies pay specialists $30 an hour to do because it requires certification and hazmat protocols. I did it myself, carefully, layer by layer. The sun beat down on my back. Sweat soaked through my shirt. I worked until my arms felt like rubber, then worked some more. By evening, I had cleared about a quarter of the roof and bagged everything in the heavy-duty disposal bags I bought, labeled them properly, did it by the book. That $25,000 Braden thought it would cost, I was going to do it for about $1,200 in materials and a lot of sweat equity. The EPA find they were so worried about. That was their problem now, not mine. I had assumed the liability, sure, but I also had time to do it right. Titan arrived the next morning in a horse trailer I borrowed from a guy I used to work with. The horse looked nervous coming down the ramp, but when his hooves hit the grass of the pasture, something changed. His ears came forward. He took a long breath. This was space. Real space. Not a corporate stable with concrete floors and artificial lighting. I walked him around the property. Let him get a sense of the place. Down by the creek, there was clay. Good, mineral-rich clay. My grandfather used to use it for poultices when the horses had inflammation. Modern veterinary science would probably call it primitive, but it worked. I packed some of that clay around Titan's injured hoof, wrapped it with clean gauze. The horse did not fight me, just stood there, chewing grass, enjoying the sun. No sterile stable. No fluorescent lights. No veterinarians with tablets and injection schedules. Just a horse being a horse. That night, I fired up the old generator and got the lights working in the house. It was not much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom that needed some plumbing work. But it was mine. No boardroom meetings. No PowerPoint presentations. No Braden telling me that tradition was the enemy of progress. I made coffee on a camp stove and sat on the front porch. From up here, I could see down into the valley where the main Thornton Equine facility was lit up like a shopping mall. All that glass and steel. All that technology. I pulled out my phone. Against my better judgment, I checked the company website. Big mistake. Braden had been busy. The Global Genetics Initiative had launched with the kind of marketing budget that could probably have fed a small country. The website looked like something Apple would design. Sleek, minimal, lots of white space and sans serif fonts. There were 3D renderings of future foals. Genetic probability calculators. A waiting list you could join with a $5,000 deposit. They were calling them legacy subscriptions. You could pre-order a thoroughbred champion before it even existed. Choose traits. Select bloodlines. Get quarterly updates on the cloning progress. The testimonials were rolling in. Sheikh Al-Mansour from Dubai, some earl from England, a Russian oligarch whose name I could not pronounce. They had collected deposits from 47 clients. The total was north of $6 million for horses that did not exist, could not exist, would never exist, because of a rule that Braden apparently never bothered to research. I sat there on that porch, drinking bad coffee, watching the stars come out over Kentucky. Somewhere down in that valley, in that glass building, Braden was probably celebrating, probably telling Veronica and the board members about user acquisition and revenue projections, probably planning his next tech conference appearance where he could talk about disrupting the horse industry. He had no idea that the Jockey Club had regulations written in the 1800s, rules that did not care about genetic science or venture capital or market disruption, rules that said a registered thoroughbred had to be conceived the old-fashioned way, live cover, natural breeding, period, no exceptions, no appeals, no amount of money could change it. I had known this for 30 years. Anyone who had actually worked in the industry knew it. But Braden had not worked in the industry. He had studied it from outside, read articles, looked at market opportunities. He had never gotten his hands dirty. My grandfather used to say something about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. Braden had knowledge. I had wisdom. The days turned into weeks. I worked on the barn during the day, stripping that asbestos roof piece by piece. It was meditative work in a way. Dangerous, sure, but straightforward. You take off a shingle. You bag it. You label it. You move to the next one. No meetings. No politics. Just work. Titan's hoof healed. That crack. I had worried about close up clean with rest and proper care. No fancy injections. No specialist consultations. Just time and clay and grass. Within a month, he was moving without any limp at all. Started to put weight back on. His coat got shinier. Turns out horses do better when you treat them like horses instead of like assets. I watched the Global Genetics website in the evenings. They kept adding clients. The deposits kept rolling in. Braden did an interview with some tech blog where he talked about how they were going to change animal breeding forever. How biology was just another form of code waiting to be optimized. How the future was subscription-based genetics. It was almost painful to watch. Like seeing someone walk toward a cliff edge in the dark, confident and smiling. 3 months in, I had the new roof finished. Metal roofing. Proper insulation. Done to code. The barn looked better than it had in decades. I had fixed the fences, cleared the overgrown pasture, even got the well pump working again. The place was starting to feel like a real ranch. Titan was healthy, strong, ready. That was when I made a phone call. My old friend Charlie worked at the Jockey Club headquarters in Lexington. We had grown up together. Both came from horse families. He had gone the administrative route, while I stayed in the barns. But we stayed in touch. He owed me a favor from years back when I helped him out of a situation involving a mare with a falsified pedigree. I asked him if he could do something for me. Something official. Something that would create a paper trail. I asked him to send a formal letter to Thornton Equine regarding their cloning program. Charlie was quiet on the phone for a minute. Then he asked me if I knew what I was doing, if I understood the consequences. I told him I understood perfectly. He said he would take care of it. Told me the letter would go out in the next batch of official correspondence. Should arrive at the company within a week. I thanked him, hung up, sat there on my porch looking down at that glass building in the valley. The morning the letter was scheduled to be delivered, I woke up early, made coffee, watched the sun come up over the hills. It was one of those perfect Kentucky mornings where the air is cool and the light hits the grass just right, and you remember why people write songs about this place. I sat on the porch with my coffee. Titan was grazing in the pasture below. The barn looked solid behind me. Everything was quiet, peaceful. That was when I saw the mail truck heading down the valley road, not coming up to my property, going to the main facility. I watched it turn into the Thornton Equine gate, watched it stop at the main building, watched the driver get out, carrying a stack of envelopes. One of those envelopes had the Jockey Club return address on it. I thought about Braden opening it, probably between meetings, probably while sipping some expensive coffee and checking his phone. The letter would be formal, professional, just a simple notification that their registration application for genetically derived offspring had been reviewed and denied per Section D of the International Thoroughbred Breeding Regulations. Live cover only, no exceptions. Every single one of those deposit holders would need to be refunded. $6 million that the company had probably already spent on marketing and infrastructure and Braden's tech conference trips. They would have to tell those sheiks and earls and oligarchs that the horses they had ordered could not be produced, could not be registered, would be worthless. A horse without papers is just a very expensive lawn ornament. My grandfather had another saying. He used to tell me that you can shear a sheep many times, but you can only skin it once. Braden had just tried to skin 47 very rich, very powerful people. That was going to be a problem for him. My phone rang. Startled me out of my thoughts. I looked at the screen. Charlie. I answered. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. He told me the letter had been delivered. Confirmed receipt at 9:47 a.m. He also told me something else. Apparently, one of the deposit holders had already called the Jockey Club offices asking for clarification. Word was spreading fast in that small world of elite horse breeding. Charlie said, I should probably hold on to something. The storm was coming. It was going to be biblical. I thanked him, told him I appreciated the heads up. He wished me luck and hung up. I sat there on my porch, holding my phone, looking down at that glass building in the valley. Somewhere inside, Braden was having the worst morning of his life, learning that his disruptive technology had just collided with a brick wall built in 1894, learning that some traditions exist for a reason. I finished my coffee, set the cup down on the porch rail. Titan lifted his head from grazing and looked at me. That horse had better instincts than most people I knew. He could sense something was about to change. The morning air was still, too still. The kind of stillness you get right before a thunderstorm rolls in. I smiled. Let it come. The storm hit exactly the way I knew it would. Fast, ugly, complete. I did not have to wait long to hear about it. The horse world is small, especially at the top. When something goes wrong with the kind of money Braden was playing with, word travels at the speed of light. By noon that same day, I had 3 separate people call me asking if I had heard what happened at Thornton Equine. I told them I had been busy working on my barn. They filled me in anyway. Apparently, Braden had been in a meeting with the marketing team when his assistant brought in the mail. He opened the Jockey Club letter, right there in front of everyone. Read it once. Read it again. Then, according to someone who was in the room, he went completely white and asked everyone to leave. The letter was polite, professional, absolutely devastating. It referenced Section D of the International Thoroughbred Breeding Regulations, a rule that had been in place since 1894 and had never been successfully challenged. Any thoroughbred foal intended for registration must be conceived through live cover, natural breeding, no artificial insemination, no genetic engineering, no cloning, no exceptions to technology, regardless of how advanced it might be. The application for registration of any offspring derived from the Global Genetics Initiative was hereby denied. The letter went on to explain, in very careful legal language, that any horse produced through their methods would be ineligible for registration with the Jockey Club. Without registration, the horse could not race in any sanctioned event, could not be sold as a registered thoroughbred, could not command the prices associated with championship bloodlines. A registered thoroughbred stallion like Titan was worth $5 million because of his papers, his lineage, his official status. A horse with the exact same genetics, but no papers was worth maybe $500 as a riding horse or pasture pet. Braden had just sold 47 wealthy clients a product that could never legally exist. I heard later that Peterson, the lawyer, was the one who had explained the full implications. He did the way you would explain basic math to someone who insisted that 2 + 2 = 5. Slow, patient, Increasingly desperate, the clients had paid deposits totaling over $6 million. They expected registered thoroughbreds with championship potential. What the company could actually deliver legally was the genetic equivalent of a very expensive lawn ornament. Horses that could not race, could not be bred into registered programs, could not maintain their value. Peterson apparently used that exact phrase. He told Braden that they had essentially sold 47 lawn mowers to people who thought they were buying Ferraris. The legal term for this was wire fraud, federal crime, prison time. Braden, to his credit, did not faint. But according to my source, he did have to sit down and put his head between his knees for a while. The phone started ringing within hours. The clients had somehow gotten wind of the issue, maybe through their own lawyers, maybe through contacts at the jockey club. Rich people talk to each other, especially when they think someone is trying to take their money. Sheikh Al-Mansour's people called first. Very polite, very firm. They wanted to discuss the registration status of their order. When could they expect the necessary documentation from the jockey club? Then the Earl from Hampshire. Then the Russian, then the Silicon Valley tech guy who had invested $200,000 because he thought genetic horses were the next crypto. Every single one of them wanted the same thing: confirmation that their deposits would result in registered, raceable thoroughbreds. Or, if that was not possible, immediate refunds. Veronica, who apparently had more business sense than her son, did the math immediately. The company had already spent most of that deposit money. Marketing campaigns, technology infrastructure, Braden's salary and travel expenses, the fancy website, the promotional videos, the consultants who promised them they were disrupting an industry. The accounts had maybe $800,000 liquid, against $6 million in deposit obligations. That was when the lawyers got involved. The real ones, not Peterson, who did property transfers and liability waivers. The kind of lawyers who specialize in securities fraud and corporate litigation. They told Braden very clearly that he had two options. Option 1, find a way to deliver registered thoroughbreds to the clients as promised. Option 2, get very comfortable with the idea of federal prison. There was no option 3. This was around the time that Braden apparently realized he needed to have a conversation with me. The man who had the one thing that could potentially save his company. The actual, physical horse that all those fancy genetic projections were based on. Titan. My phone rang that evening. I was feeding the horse, watching the sun go down over the pasture. Beautiful evening. Cool air. Everything peaceful. I saw Braden's number on the screen and let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately. I let that one go too. Third time I answered. Figured I might as well hear what he had to say. His voice was different than I remembered. Less confident. More desperate. He asked if we could meet. Said it was urgent. Company emergency. He needed to discuss the situation with Titan and perhaps renegotiate some terms of our agreement. I told him I was pretty happy with our agreement as it stood. He had his genetic rights. I had my horse. There was a long pause on the phone. Then he said something that told me everything I needed to know about how bad things had gotten. He said he was prepared to offer me a significant financial incentive to reconsider the custody arrangement, perhaps a temporary loan of the animal for breeding purposes. I asked him what the jockey club letter had said. Another pause, longer this time. He admitted that there had been some regulatory complications. But surely, he said, we could work together to find a solution. We were both reasonable businessmen. There had to be a way forward that benefited everyone. I told him I would think about it. Hung up. Sat there on my porch, scratching Titan's nose. The horse had no idea he was at the center of a multi-million-dollar disaster. He was just happy to have grass and space and clean water. Sometimes I envy horses. Braden showed up the next morning. Did not call ahead. Just drove up the dirt road to Dead Man's Creek in his Tesla, with two guys in dark suits following in a black SUV. Security, I guessed. Though what they thought they were going to secure, I had no idea. I was replacing a fence post when I heard the vehicles coming. Straightened up, wiped my hands on my jeans. Waited. Braden got out of his car, looking like he had not slept in about 3 days. Expensive suit but wrinkled. Hair that usually looked like something from a magazine now just looked messy. The two security guys got out of the SUV and stood there trying to look intimidating. I leaned on my fence post and waited for him to speak. He tried to start with pleasantries, asked how I was settling in, commented on the work I had done on the barn, said it looked good. I could tell he was stalling, trying to figure out how to ask for what he came for. I made him work for it, did not help him out, just stood there. Finally, he got to it, said there had been a misunderstanding with the Jockey Club, a regulatory issue that his legal team was working to resolve. But in the meantime, the company needed access to Titan for traditional breeding purposes. Just temporarily. They would compensate me generously. He was authorized to offer $50,000 per month for a 6-month breeding season. $300,000. Just to let them use my horse the old-fashioned way. I asked him about his global genetics initiative, his disruption of the industry, his subscription model for future champions. What happened to all that? His face did something complicated. Anger, embarrassment, desperation, all mixed together. He said the market was evolving. They were pivoting the business model to accommodate current regulatory frameworks while continuing to develop long-term technological solutions. Corporate speak for, we screwed up and now we need the thing we told everyone was obsolete. I told him I would need to think about it, asked him to leave. That was when his tone changed. He stopped being polite, started talking fast, said the company was in a state of emergency. They had obligations to clients, legal exposure. He had a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. This was bigger than just me and my stubborn attachment to the past. He demanded access to the horse, said the company still had rights according to the contract. They owned the genetic material, the breeding potential, all the valuable aspects of the animal. I pointed out that the contract also gave me exclusive rights to natural exploitation. And breeding, last time I checked, was pretty natural. That was when he started yelling, said I was being unreasonable, obstinate. I was sabotaging the company out of spite because I could not handle being replaced by someone younger and smarter. This was about ego, about my inability to accept that the world had moved on without me. The security guys moved a little closer, try and be threatening without actually doing anything illegal. I pulled out my phone, called the sheriff's office, told them I had trespassers on my property who were refusing to leave, gave them my address. They said someone would be there in 10 minutes. Braden's face went from angry to calculating. He looked at the security guys, looked at me, looked at his watch. He tried one more time, told me I was making a mistake. The company could make this difficult for me. They had lawyers, resources, ways of making my life complicated. I just pointed at the road, told him to be gone before the sheriff arrived, or he could explain his threats to a law enforcement officer. They left, drove down that dirt road, throwing up dust behind them. But I knew Braden well enough to know he was not done. Desperate men do desperate things, and he was beyond desperate. He was looking at federal charges and the complete collapse of everything he had built. Sure enough, 2 days later, he came back, this time with Veronica. And this time, they had Peterson the lawyer with them. And this time, they brought paperwork. They wanted to invoke some clause about company emergencies and asset requisition. They had legal theories about how their genetic rights superseded my physical custody in cases of business necessity. They had a court order, or what they claimed was a court order, demanding I hand over the horse pending a full hearing on the contract interpretation. I read through it all, took my time. Then I called my own lawyer, guy I knew from way back, did agricultural law and property disputes. He read through everything over the phone while they all stood there in my driveway. He told me their paperwork was garbage. The court order was a motion, not an actual order. It had not been granted yet. I did not have to comply with anything. But I should probably show up to the hearing in 2 weeks if I want to keep things legal. I thanked him, hung up, looked at Braden and Veronica. Here's what I told them. I said they could file all the motions they wanted. They could spend whatever money they had left on lawyers and legal theories. But at the end of the day, I had a signed contract giving me exclusive rights to natural exploitation, of the animal. I had physical custody. And I had a horse standing in my pasture, eating my grass on my land. Braden started to argue, started talking about good faith and business relationships and how we could work together. I cut him off, told him I would see him at the hearing. Until then, he needed to leave my property. Veronica, who had been quiet up until then, finally spoke. She said they were going to destroy me. They would tie me up in court for years, cost me everything I had, make my life a living nightmare of legal fees and depositions and motions. I looked at her, this woman who married my father for his money and his company, who raised a son that thought tradition was just another obstacle to profit, who had supported every decision to push me out and modernize and disrupt. I told her something my grandfather used to say, you can shear a sheep many times, but you can only skin it once. And her son had just tried to skin 47 very wealthy, very angry sheep. Good luck with that. They left, angrier this time. Veronica was already on her phone before they even got to their car, probably calling more lawyers, probably trying to figure out how to fix a problem that could not be fixed with money or connections or legal tricks. The hearing happened 2 weeks later. County courthouse. Judge Miller presiding. She was about 60, had been on the bench for 20 years, and had exactly zero patience for corporate nonsense. Braden showed up with 3 lawyers. I showed up with 1. And my contract. His lawyers argued for 45 minutes about business necessity and implied rights and the spirit of the agreement versus the letter of the law. They talked about how my refusal to cooperate was causing irreparable harm to a legitimate business, how the company's genetic rights should be interpreted to include breeding rights, because breeding was, after all, a form of genetic exploitation. It was impressive, actually, the way they could use that many words to say essentially nothing. Judge Miller listened, made notes, did not look impressed. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood up, took about 3 minutes. He pointed out that the contract explicitly gave me exclusive rights to natural exploitation. He read the definition of natural exploitation in agricultural law. It included breeding, specifically included breeding. That was literally what the term meant in the context of animal husbandry. The company had voluntarily agreed to this language. They had added it to the contract themselves at my request. They could not now claim they did not understand what they had signed. Furthermore, my lawyer continued, the company had represented to their clients that they could produce registered thoroughbreds through genetic technology. This had proven to be false. They were now trying to force me to provide breeding services to cover up their own misrepresentation to customers. The court should not reward fraud by nullifying a valid contract. Judge Miller asked Braden's lawyers if they had any response to that. They tried, talked about technicalities and alternative interpretations, but their arguments kept coming back to the same basic problem. They had signed a contract. The contract said what it said, and they wanted the judge to ignore what they had agreed to because it was now inconvenient. Judge Miller was not having it. She denied their motion, ruled that the contract was clear and unambiguous. I had exclusive rights to natural exploitation, which included breeding. The company retained rights to genetic material and cloning technologies, should those ever become legally viable in the thoroughbred industry, but they had no right to demand access to the physical animal for traditional breeding purposes. Case closed. Braden looked like someone had hit him with a brick. His lawyer started talking about appeals. Judge Miller shut that down too, told them they could appeal if they wanted to waste more money, but her ruling was based on clear contract language and established agricultural law. An appeals court was going to reach the same conclusion. She also noted, somewhat pointedly, that the company might want to focus less on litigation and more on making their clients whole. Fraud claims were starting to pile up in the civil docket. We walked out of that courthouse into bright Kentucky sunshine. Braden and his lawyers went one way. I went the other. My lawyer shook my hand, told him to call if they tried anything else, and headed back to his office. I drove back to Dead Man's Creek, fed, tightened, sat on my porch, and waited. Block 4, the payoff. They came back the next morning. Not with lawyers this time. Not with security. Just Braden and Veronica in a rental car, because apparently the Tesla had been repossessed. They looked defeated, tired, scared. I let them come up onto porch, offer them coffee. They both declined. Veronica did most of the talking this time. She said they needed help. The company was drowning. Clients were filing lawsuits. The bank had frozen their accounts pending fraud investigation. They had maybe 2 weeks before everything collapsed completely. They needed Titan. They needed me. And they were willing to negotiate any reasonable terms. I asked what they were offering. Braden, who had barely said a word, finally spoke up. He said they would pay whatever I wanted. $100,000 a month. $200,000. Name my price for breeding rights. I shook my head, told him money was not going to fix his problem. See, here's what Braden had never understood about the business. He looked at those 47 clients and saw 47 revenue opportunities, 47 deposits to collect. He had promised them all horses, promised them all delivery within 18 months. He was thinking scale, mass production, efficiency, but that was never going to work. Not physically, not logically. A stallion like Titan could safely cover maybe 50 to 60 mares in a breeding season. That was pushing it. You go beyond that, you risk injuring the horse and decreasing conception rates. It is biology. It has limits. Even if I agree to rent him out, Braden could never fulfill all 47 orders in one season. He would need at least 2 seasons. Maybe 3 if he wanted to do it right. And that was assuming all the clients were willing to wait, which they were not. They wanted their money back now. They wanted lawsuits. They wanted blood. I explained this to them, slowly, made sure they understood that their problem was not just access to Titan. Their problem was that they had made promises they could never keep. They had sold a product at scale that could not exist at scale. Braden put his head in his hands. Veronica looked at me with something close to hatred. Then I told them there was a solution, not the solution they wanted, but a solution. They needed to stop thinking like tech entrepreneurs and start thinking like luxury brands. They needed to pivot from mass market to ultra-exclusive, turn their disaster into a feature, not a bug. Here is what they should do. Contact all 47 clients. Apologize for the miscommunication about the technology. Explain that due to unforeseen regulatory requirements, they were pivoting to an ultra-premium model. Traditional breeding only. Strictly limited. Only the most elite horses would be produced. Then refund the small clients. Anyone who had put down less than $50,000. Give them their money back immediately. Apologize. Move on. That would leave them with maybe 12 or 15 big clients. The sheik, the earl, the serious money people who could afford to pay real prices. Then they tell those remaining clients the truth. Titan is so genetically valuable that the company has decided to artificially restrict the breeding program. Only 50 foals per year. Maybe less. This is not a bug. This is extreme curation. This makes every Titan offspring incredibly rare. Increases the value. And here's the important part. They triple the price. A registered Titan foal is not $100,000 anymore. It is $300,000, maybe more, because scarcity creates value. When you tell rich people they cannot have something, they want it more. Look at Hermes bags, Ferrari cars, Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. The less available something is, the more people will pay for it. Braden wanted to democratize championship horses. That was his mistake. You cannot democratize excellence. You can only ration it. I watched this sink in. Veronica was the first to get it. I could see her brain working through the math. Fewer clients, higher prices, manageable logistics, legal product. It could actually work. Braden looked skeptical. He said that went against everything he had been taught about scaling and growth and market penetration. I told him he could stick with his business school theories and go to prison. Or he could accept that some industries have been doing things a certain way for centuries because that way actually works. There was a long silence on that porch. Titan was grazing in the pasture below. Birds were singing. The wind moved through the grass. Everything was peaceful and normal, and completely disconnected from the corporate chaos we were discussing. Finally, Veronica asked what I wanted. what my terms were. I had thought about this a lot over the past few weeks. I knew this moment was coming. Knew they would eventually have come crawling back. I had prepared. Here is what I told them. First, I would agree to make Titan available for a limited breeding program. 50 mares per year maximum. Premium clients only. I would maintain physical custody of the horse at all times. Breeding would happen here, at Dead Man's Creek, under my supervision. The clients could bring their mares here, or we could arrange transport with veterinary support. But Titan did not leave my property. Second, the company would pay me 30% of all breeding fees, not a flat rental, a percentage. If they were charging $300,000 per foal, I got $90,000. Their incentive was aligned with mine. We both wanted maximum value per breeding. Third, Braden left the company. Completely. Resigned from the board. Sold his shares. Walked away. I did not care what he did next, but he was done with Thornton Equine. Fourth, and this was the important one, the company transferred 51% of voting shares to me. Majority control. I became the primary decision-maker. Veronica could keep her shares as a silent partner. She would still make money. But the company went back to being run by someone who actually understood horses. And fifth, we changed the name back. No more Global Genetics Initiative. We were Thornton Equine again. My father's company. My grandfather's legacy. We could modernize where it made sense. Update equipment. Improve efficiency. But we did it with respect for the tradition and knowledge that built this industry. Those were my terms. Non negociable. Veronica looked at Braden. Braden looked at the ground. Neither one of them said anything for a long time. Finally, Braden stood up. He walked to the edge of the porch, stared out at the pasture where Titan was grazing. When he turned back around, something had changed in his face. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. He just looked tired. He said they would do it. All of it. He would sign whatever papers were needed. Veronica nodded. She was already thinking ahead, already calculating how to spin this to the remaining clients, how to turn catastrophe into opportunity. She was good at that, I had to admit. Not ethical, but effective. We shook hands. Not like friends. Not even like partners. Just like two people who had reached an agreement that kept them both out of prison and bankruptcy. They left, said they would have Peterson draw up the new contracts. Get everything formalized within the week. I sat back down on my porch. Titan lifted his head from grazing and looked at me. That horse knew something had changed. Animals always know. The sun was starting to set. That golden light that Kentucky is famous for. The kind of light that makes you understand why people write songs and poems about this place. Why generations of families have built their lives around these hills, and this grass and these animals. My phone buzzed. Text message from Charlie at the Jockey Club. He had heard through the grapevine what happened. Wanted to know if I was okay. If I needed anything. I texted back that everything was fine. Better than fine, actually. Justice had been served. The old ways had won. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a quote. The mills of the gods grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. I smiled. Charlie always did have a sense of drama. The contracts took a week to finalize. Peterson worked fast when he was motivated. Braden signed everything. Transferred his shares. Resigned from the board. I heard later he moved to Colorado and started a cryptocurrency consulting business. Some people never learn. Veronica kept her shares but kept her distance. She understood the deal. She made money, but she did not make decisions. Fine by me. Her quarterly dividend checks would keep her comfortable, but my father's company was mine again. The first client visit happened 3 weeks later. Sheikh Al-Mansour himself flew in from Dubai, brought his prize mare in a custom horse trailer that probably cost more than most people's houses, brought his own veterinary team, brought enough security to invade a small country. But when he saw a Titan, when he watched the horse move and breathe and exist in that open pasture instead of some sterile corporate stable, something shifted in his expression. He understood immediately that this was not mass production. This was craftsmanship, legacy, something real. The breeding happened naturally, properly. with respect for both animals. The Sheik's team documented everything, took their samples for verification, did their due diligence. Before he left, the Sheik found me in the barn, thanked me for maintaining standards, said the world needed more people who refused to compromise excellence for convenience. I told him that was just called doing things right. He smiled, shook my hand. His driver handed me an envelope on the way out. Inside was a check for $350,000. The breeding fee plus a $50,000 tip for, as his note said, preserving the integrity of the bloodline. I deposited that check, paid off the property, bought new equipment, hired back some of the people Braden had let go, good people who knew horses and knew the work. Months passed. The business stabilized. Word got out among the real players in the thoroughbred world that Thornton Equine was doing things the right way again. Old school, high quality, limited availability. Demand increased. Prices increased. We stayed disciplined. 50 breedings per year. No more. We turn away clients. We maintain standards. And because we maintained standards, those standards had value. One evening, I was working the barn when I heard a truck coming up the drive. Did not recognize it at first. Then I saw who was driving. My old foreman from back in the day. Guy named Ray who had been with my father for 20 years. Braden had let him go in the first round of cuts. Ray had found work at another farm, but it was not the same. He got out of his truck, looked around at the property, at the restored barn, at Titan in the pasture, at the new sign I had hung by the gate. Simple wood. My father's original logo. Just the words, Thornton Equine, and the year my grandfather founded the place. Ray smiled, asked if I was hiring. I told him I was. Asked if he was interested in coming back. He said he had been interested since the day he left. We shook hands. He started the next week. That is how you rebuild something. Not with venture capital and disruption and marketing campaigns. With people who know the work. With respect for craft. With patience and discipline. And a refusal to compromise just because someone offers you a shortcut. The industry noticed. Within a year, Thornton Equine was being mentioned again in the same breath as the legendary breeding operations. The ones that had been around for generations. The ones that did not chase trends but set standards. We were not the biggest. We were not the flashiest. But we were solid, reliable, excellent. And excellence, real excellence, always finds its market. I think about Braden sometimes. Wonder if he ever understood what happened. Wonder if he learned anything from getting his teeth kicked in by a rule book written in the 1800s. Probably not. Guys like that usually do not learn. They just move on to the next thing they can disrupt, the next industry they can revolutionize, until someone else teaches them the same lesson. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem was making sure Titan stayed healthy. Making sure each breeding was done right. Making sure the people who worked for me were treated fairly and paid well. Making sure my father's legacy meant something more than just a name on a corporate letterhead. Those were good problems to have. On quiet evenings, I would sit on that porch at Dead Man's Creek and watch the sun go down over Kentucky bluegrass country. Titan would be in the pasture, doing what horses do. Ray and the crew would be finishing up in the barn. Everything would be exactly as it should be. My grandfather used to say that the land remembers. It remembers who took care of it and who did not. It remembers hard work and shortcuts. It remembers respect and exploitation. And eventually, the land has its say. I think he was right about that. This land had seen a lot over the years. My grandfather building the first barn. My father expanding the operation. The corporate takeover and the push for modernization. And now, the return to basics. The land was still here. Still growing grass. Still supporting life. Still doing what it had always done. Everything else was just noise. The first foal from a new program was born on a Tuesday morning in April. Perfect conditions. Healthy mare. Natural birth. No complications. The kind of thing that had been happening for millions of years, long before anyone invented genetics or cloning or subscription services. When that foal stood up on wobbly legs and took its first steps, I understood something fundamental. This was real. This existed in the physical world. You could touch it. You could see it breathe. You could watch it grow. You could not download this from a cloud. You could not optimize it with an algorithm. You could not scale it beyond the limits of biology and time and care. The sheik flew in to see his foal, brought his whole family. His kids ran around the pasture laughing. His wife took about 1,000 pictures. They stayed for 3 days, enjoying the farm, the land, the simplicity of it all. Before they left, the sheik pulled me aside. He said he had been involved in horse breeding for 30 years, had spent millions, had worked with the biggest names in the industry, but he had never seen someone run an operation with the kind of integrity I maintained. I told him I was just doing what my father taught me, what his father taught him. Nothing revolutionary, nothing innovative, just the work. He nodded, said that was exactly why it was revolutionary. In a world that worshipped speed and scale and disruption, simply doing the work right was an act of rebellion. I had never thought of it that way. But maybe he was right. That evening, after they left, I hung my father's old wooden sign where the neon Global Genetics logo used to be. Solid oak, hand-carved, the kind of thing that lasts. As I stepped back to look at it, I heard an engine in the distance. A transport truck was coming up the road. Another client bringing another mare for breeding. This one was from England, Earl of something, old money, old bloodlines, people who understood that some things cannot be rushed. Titan heard the truck too, lifted his head, seemed to understand that he had a job to do, that he was not just a genetic asset or a digital product. He was a horse, doing what horses have done for thousands of years, creating the next generation. I walked down to meet the transport. The sun was setting behind the hills. Everything was gold and shadow. The kind of moment you cannot manufacture or fake or sell. The kind of moment that just exists because you are present for it. My grandfather was right about a lot of things, but the thing he was most right about was this. The world will always need real things made by real work. Technology changes, markets shift, industries evolve. But at the foundation, we still need soil and water and living things that grow. We still need people willing to do the work right, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. We still need standards that mean something, traditions that carry weight, rules that exist because generations of experience prove they matter. Braden wanted to bypass all of that, wanted to jump straight to the profit without putting in the time or the effort or the respect. And he learned what everyone eventually learns when they try that approach. Reality does not care about your pitch deck. Nature does not negotiate. And some things, the important things, cannot be downloaded from cloud. They have to be earned, built, maintained, protected, one day at a time, one horse at a time, one generation at a time. The transport driver backed his trailer up to the barn. I helped guide him in. Ray came out to assist with the unloading. The Earl's mare was beautiful, nervous from the travel, but healthy, good bloodlines. We would take care of her, do right by her, give Titan and her the time and space to do what nature intended. In a year, there would be a foal. In 3 years, that foal would race. In 10 years, maybe that horse would be standing at stud somewhere, continuing the line, building on the foundation. That is how legacy works. Not in quarterly reports or exit strategies, but in long chains of care and craft and patience. I looked up at my father's sign, Thornton Equine. Same name it had been for 3 generations. Same name it would have for the next 3. If I did my job right, the sun dropped below the hills. The stars started coming out. Titan was in his stall, content. The mare was settling in. Ray was checking water and feed. Everything was as it should be. I stood there in the Kentucky night, breathing air that smelled like grass and horses and earth. The same smells my grandfather breathed. The same smells my children would breathe, if I was lucky enough to have them. Some things change. Some things stay the same. And the wise man knows which is which. I walked back up to the house. Tomorrow there would be more work, more clients, more problems to solve and decisions to make. But tonight, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do, Living a life that meant something. Building something that would last. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.